I will ask you to mute your microphones and switch off cameras when not speaking, and don't interrupt the speakers. Ask question in the chat group, and our questions will be answered at the end of the session. And yeah, we are recording this session now, and for the feedback, Colin and I and so on, we will look after that. So this is what we going to do. I will give a short introduction to the H0 project. Then I will present a short summary of the last 5 sessions, and then I hand over to Colin Simpson. He will facilitate the discussion panel with our panel. Okay. So we want to let you know as well that we have an online training and case study website, and there you can go by yourself to the topics, and there are questions as a kind of quiz as well, and so pilot cases can be seen. So a short introduction to the H0. What is H0? Interact Northwest Europe project housing for energy, in short H0. That is not only an housing project, is we try to fill a gap and develop a market for small, affordable, low carbon and energy efficient homes, and not only for the social market, for the private market as well. And we want to adopt and applying innovative digital technologies for design, manufacturing, and assembly. We want or promote to use low carbon materials and low carbon construction methods, and we develop an H0 benchmark which we want to implement, and developing suitable designs that improve the quality of life. The consortium is a group of 9 members all over Northwest Europe, in Ireland, in Netherlands, in Belgium, and in Germany. And we all have different tasks and work delivers. And yeah, so 3CA, we working on 2 pilot sites, or 3 pilot sites here in Ireland, with the consults in Kilkenny and in Carlow. We used to work with a pilot in Wexford, but that those some reasons not go long. And we working on the long-term effects, and share and cooperate with other partners. As I said, so we had 4 pilot sites. But so the Wexford pilot is not going on anymore. But 1 site in Carlow and 2 sites in Kilkenny are going on. They are starting at site in January, and yeah, will be finished at the end of this year. And here we saved already, so with this pilots we saved this 60%, as we reached targets there, so which we calculated from life cycle analysis and pre-BRs. And in the long term, we expect by using our platform and the benchmark in the long term that we save 25% costs, which is quite attractive. So this benchmark consists on the work of all the partners, and some of the partners presented in our webinars, and I will give a short overview of the content of this the former sessions. I presented our low carbon first fabric approach, and highlights the importance of the upfront CO2 emission, and so also compared to the operational and the environmental benefits. I was talking about low carbon materials and construction types, and so how we bind that together into a low carbon first fabric approach. Main thing is so the importance of the embodied CO2 emission that changed from in ratio of 1 to 10, but we focusing in the last few in recent years on operational, so we reduced it operational, but increased actually a little bit the embodied, so that they are 50-50. But when you look in the next 20 years, 10 to 20 years, when it's important, the embodied, also this is upfront, and this in doing a life cycle of 50 years will be the slower section that will be the embodied part, and the red one that is where we are at the moment with the operational, but still the embodied is dominant, and here we are able to make big savings. So that is where we want to go, so and we achieve that actually with some of our pilots, so that we reduce embodied carbon and operational. So when we do that in the early design phases. So we need to evaluate the early design decision, so which influence the later design stages and the end result, and we so try to make that with a pre-LCA, where we measure the difference between a baseline and the innovative construction types, and we used some other measures and but focus on winds, on carbon hotspots and how to mitigate them, and that is how we develop our pilots and this approach. Session 2 that was held by a partner, Thomas Holz, oder Thomas Holz from Austria, but he's working on a German pilot in Lahr, that's in southwest Germany, in the Black Forest, the biggest forest area in Germany, or one of it. And they developed a kind of CLT, but it's glueless. It's called DLT, dull laminated timber, and so that is pressed and connected with hardwood dowels and screws. Really innovative, and Florian Thoma and his company, they developing and they use that already since 10 to 20 years, and developing so an digital factory where they draw and sketch every part before they actually cut it on the site and deliver that on site. And Florian developed a prototype for reuse. So this is this prototype will be built in Lahr. It's a test tower, but all the parts that will be reused after 5 years' time, transported to Austria, and the Florian will build an 2-story residential building out of it. And to show as an example what is possible, and he developed an extra design, detailed design set, so that is easily to assemble. We had a session with Open System Lab, Alistair Parvin, he is the CEO of this company, and he explained so how we use a platform. And there are two main things. That is design for manufacture and assembly is similar to the IKEA thing. So you have the materials, you have the parts, you assemble that, and you have a product. And the same is happening in the car industry, and they showed that this is possible as well for housing. So with the Wiki House system, and we try to develop this kind of platform with all our construction types that we developed in our pilots. And this there are two main points. That is, first is the DFMA and the design team and or planning team. So, and this is what we're doing at the moment. There's a customer or somebody who wants to build a house who goes to an architect or planner and design this, and then you have a design team that go forward and back, and that extend the planning duration a lot. And they promote that we have this pre-designed, prefabricated, we have this product, and we have the rules and the parameters, and if you have a site, you can put this type of design, designed by yourself, and you have an energy calculator and an low carbon, also an embodied carbon calculator there, and the architect still need to check the regulation and the structural and M&E things, but the most of it is already designed and developed, and you have this manufacturer who is qualified to assemble this kind of construction types, and then also manufacturer to produce them, and the installer to assemble that on site. Then we have two sessions with Southwest College with Barry McCarran. He's the head of the Southwest College department for passive housing, and he's the head of Passive House Association in Ireland as well. And he will hold two sessions about the passive house principles, which are so high-level insulation, also this most important thing, the continuous external insulation layer, and but only to an effective amount. So they have a rough number of 200 mil and not more for insulation, and yeah, PV windows, so different sizes for different orientations, and different glass specs for different orientations, and ventilation for heating, fresh air, and heat recovery, and air tightness. And that was one session, and a second session about techniques, so low carbon technique like heat pumps, infrared heating, biomass heating, solar heating, and the focus was here on photovoltaic, PV technology, and battery storage. And that's it. And I will hand over now to Colin Simpson, and maybe again, this are the also before I hand over, I want to show this. I forgot. This is the self-assembling group that building the Almere houses, and they have already built the first phase. Nine families are living in these houses. They built that by themselves. This is an assembling of cross-laminated timber, but it's similar to DLT, what Tomahawk is doing, and we're using closed panel timber frame in Mullinavat in Kilkenny, and in Greenwich, Ganama, and in Carlo we use insulated concrete framework, and in CAMC in Belgium they use prefabricated, pre-designed and pre-installed containers for setting them up on the site. And these that's our beneficials. So we achieve long-term savings in CO2 emission, and we saving resources and costs. We reduce the CO2 emission immediately by using low carbon materials and low carbon construction types. Also until the practical completion, we reduce already our CO2 emission, and with the mass timber solution, we even store for the lifetime of the material. We store the CO2 in the material, and yeah, be using pre-specs, pre-designed systems, and prefabrication and offsite assembling methods, which shorten the site duration and getting much more precise products, and be reducing ways. We really working on this, or work on this circularity, as we use, reuse, recycle, and in the worst case, if the recycling process does not get any further, we can use the most of the material for thermally efficient energy generation. So now I hand over to Colin, and I hope I wasn't talking too long. And here we go. I stopped sharing now, and hand over to Colin.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Yeah, it's a very interesting project, and you can see there that in theory, there's no reason why the majority of our construction shouldn't be adopting this approach. We still have a very traditional build mindset going on here in Ireland, and I think that approaches like this we can certainly learn a lot from, you know. So I'd like to open up a discussion panel there now. So basically what we're looking at is low carbon modular housing, and the first question really is, why is Ireland so far in adopting low carbon modular buildings? So I'd like to put that to the floor, please, if you've any input.
Do you want me to go first?
Yes,
Colin?
you can start, yeah. Marion, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we've been doing very well in Ireland with embed on new builds, but I mean, it's true that we haven't taken this broader approach, especially in relation to wildlife carbon and circularity. So it's great to see. It's great to see that project, and I think that's really something we would like, as the Irish Green Building Council, to see address more. I think there are a few things there. There is a perception, perhaps, that green is more expensive. I'm not saying it's always the case. Like the LCA, if you do a life cycle assessment, you know, in the long term, it will save you money and resources. But there is this perception that it's more expensive. There is also the perception that it's more complicated. So I suppose there is a need as well to educate being the people who buy the properties, or, you know, local authorities and the industry.
Yeah, so I know myself, particularly recently, I've been driving around Kilkenny and I can see some new housing estates being built, but they're still using traditional methods. And I was actually thinking to myself, they just seem to be very slow to adopt. And I'm not sure if it's because builders are slow to adopt, or are there barriers to adoption? I just trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, really, you know. Is it a planning issue? Which I don't think it is. Is it a supply issue? Is it the fact that we don't have the facilities to produce these buildings in the factories locally? I'm just still trying to get my head around that one, you know. So really, and then in terms of, obviously the Europeans seem to be doing a lot better at this than us. I'm just wondering as to what can we learn from the Europeans, you know. How are they so good at it and we're not? Any comments from anybody?
Eddie has his hand up there if you want to.
Oh, sorry, Eddie. Yes, go on.
Yeah, I suppose one of the issues as I see it is the question of scale. For example, if you look at local authorities and the social housing construction program, while when you add up the program cumulatively and it delivers, you know, thousands of houses over a number of years, but if you look at the individual projects, because of, you know, the spread out of social housing demand into settlements and the, I suppose, shall we say, negative experiences of mass social housing building in the past, you know, in you know, 30, 40 years ago, and the perceived, both perceived and actual issues with those. The typical social housing scheme now is averages around 20 to maybe 30 dwellings in a single project or a single scheme. So the scale of the challenge for the construction sector to ramp up to use innovative construction methodologies for projects of very low scale is a real challenge. And you couple that then with the construction sector in Ireland, of all the kind of industries and business activities that are out there, the spend by the actual sector, as opposed to state-sponsored academic studies, but by the actual sector on research and development, is extremely low. So when you couple those two things together, that's where the conservative nature, I suppose, comes to bear. And the second point I would say is that when you look at the consumer of the product, the house purchaser, we're very, very good at looking at the cost of the house and what that entails in terms of mortgage repayments. And we know, and I think that the public and the purchaser understand that because that's their bread and butter. But we failed to make the jump from that mortgage repayment to the overall operational cost of a house. And the operational cost of a house is the mortgage repayment plus the running cost, the heating cost, the insurance cost. And it's always struck me as very odd. We're way behind on that when it comes to our main investment, which is our houses. But we're very, very good when it comes to our second biggest investment, which is our cars. We're very good at assessing the cost of a car and the running cost of the car, but we've never made that link as a society with our housing. And until we make that link and the consumer drives that, I suppose, whole life cost approach that we do with cars, if we could make that jump into property, then I think the construction sector will respond, albeit slowly. And I think that the job we have to do is enable the construction sector to respond in a more flexible and timely approach to meet that need. So I think it's a pincer movement in terms of both the consumer of the product and the provider of the product. And until we can align those two things better and get a better understanding, we're always going to face a challenge in changing the mindset and changing the industry. Thanks, Colin.
So just to follow on from that then, Eddie, just two things that kind of stick out. One is obviously in terms of the life cycle analysis, for want of a better word, or the running cost of the house over time, as you were saying, which people don't seem to look at. Is that not reflected in the BER cert, in that they're buying an A3 or an A2? And I know that the BER cert doesn't relate to an actual physical monetary value of saying this house is going to cost you $1,000 a year to run or whatever, but there possibly needs to be some adaptation of the BER scheme just to have some kind of monetary element to it. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Colin. I think that the BER cert, an A1 or a B3 doesn't mean anything to anybody.
No, it doesn't.
But €500 versus €2,500 a year to run,
yeah,
means a lot to people. Similarly, there's probably, if you take just the analogy I used earlier, people understand I get 70 miles to the gallon versus I get 30 miles to the gallon. They understand that very, very quickly, and it's it's the typical kind of conversation when somebody's buying a car, or how good is it to run? I'm getting 70 miles to the gallon. I think we need to bring that kind of analysis and that kind of simplified analysis to bear on the running cost of a house. And I think, funnily enough, actually, one of the things we are seeing, and maybe this is the first manifestation of it, in social housing, because we're building a lot of new houses at the moment, we're seeing a greater kind of reluctance on behalf of tenants to accept a second-hand property as opposed to a new property, because they are starting to understand that the newer property will have is far easier and cheaper to heat than the second-hand property. So anecdotal evidence from local authorities is that the newer properties, yeah, no great issue with getting tenants into those. Slight reluctance on behalf of tenants to take second-hand properties, and a lot of that revolves around the perceived difference in heating costs and running costs. So maybe the tide is starting to turn slowly.
Yeah, I think Brian Cassidy wants to jump in there. Brian?
Yeah, just getting set up there. I had myself on mute. Thank you, Colin. Just go back to the modular construction and embodied carbon. I think the embodied carbon industry is still at its very early stages of development, and I think it's difficult for builders and designers to design in the materials that would be required to ensure that there's low embodied carbon in a building. The mass concrete and similar materials widely available, high in embodied carbon, but easy for construction, and everybody's well used to it. But in relation to modularity and offsite, and with that, I assume we mean offsite construction as well. There's a question of scale. So a project I'm involved in, Indu Zero, like their target is 15,000 units to be retrofitted a year to make the factory blueprint viable. And what we haven't seen in this country is an investment in a factory. So we have a number of small modular constructing factories in the country, and evidence in the newspapers would suggest that they are mad keen to expand, but the investment isn't happening for them there yet. And that investment is dependent upon the developers and the builders and the constructors and the designers saying, we will use your product. And that's a difficulty, getting that investment to build that modular construction. From a society point of view, modular construction creates all sorts of ideas of Ballymun and other a similar appearance all over the countryside. It's like buying a load. People perceive they're buying a load of black Ford cars, you know, as it was back in the 1920s. Any colour you like to black, but that's not the case. In fact, the finishes you can get through modular construction can be far more complex and far more appealing than you can ever get through the current method. So I think there's we've a journey to go in terms of getting modular construction established in the country, and certainly modular retrofitting.
Is it a case that we either need to educate the designers and influencers in that space, or do we need to educate potential homeowners?
I would say investors, the homeowners. There's so many people desperately homeowners. I don't think they will be that fussy once to see the finished product.
Because traditionally now I know that people have tended to sway more towards the concrete brick of built house, you know, because they feel that it's that more solid and blah blah blah, which is absolutely correct. But in terms of thermal comfort, etc., if you're comparing it to one of the houses like Ralph was building there in Carlo, there's no comparison, you know, in terms of the embodied carbon and operational carbon.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree in terms of sturdy construction. I mean, the modular construction is as sturdy as anything built with concrete. You know, we're not talking about the three little piggies and the straw house, and I forget what the middle house was.
Yeah, but I don't think
the brick house. But no, it's as good, and the finished product is as good.
I think the part of the problem is that, as you say earlier there, Brian, the embodied and operational carbon are two new things that have come into the mix. Before, even when we were talking about modular construction, it was purely about speed of delivery, etc. Whereas now we're looking at actually reducing carbon through this technology. But I'm not convinced that the wider public have an understanding of embodied and operational carbon, you know, in terms of adopting this method. And I would say even potentially investors as well.
Yeah, I would say we're about to get a rude awakening in terms of operational carbon with the increase in energy prices. It'll come in that way. But in terms of the industry, I think we need to get into modular construction first, because the low carbon construction techniques, a lot of the materials aren't there on an industrial scale yet. You know, and that'll be my view. I'm open to correction on it. And I think we need to get into modular construction with what we have. And over time, then the industry can modernize and upgrade to include low embodied carbon materials. And I think it will get there. But we do need to get into modular construction as an industry. And it's like, I was on a forum there yesterday. There's lots of discussion going on. There's lots of research into the construction industry, but there is a lack of focus for the construction industry itself, to focus on what it needs to do and to provide the accommodation that people need to live in and to work in.
But in the context of that, then, we've seen that government have been very radical in implementing measures, such as they're saying that they're going to ban the sale of petrol or diesel cars from 2030 or whatever the case may be, whatever date it is. Do they need to basically start to penalize builders, etc., for building non-modular, non-low carbon homes, or incentivize the building of them?
No, I'm not. I think the thing needs to be examined in detail as to what is the scale we require. So if you just take that blueprint for a retrofitting factory in Holland, 15,000 units per year is what its economical operational target is, at about 40,000 euro per house, and you get what they call a net zero energy building. We need to start looking and thinking in those terms, in terms of both the new build and in terms of the retrofitting. Bear in mind, for the new build, 15,000 houses a year, if that's, say, the target for new build from a factory to make it viable, that's only 2 factories in Ireland, you know, going forward. And that may be the problem. Maybe it's a question of scale for us. But I wouldn't say we're too far behind. I mean, there's still there's similar issues in Europe. You know, the scale of modular construction isn't that great.
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, although they're not great, they're still a fair bit ahead of the curve than us. You know, they've been at this a lot longer. So they're probably at the stage now where their modular design, they're starting to look at the low carbon type house, whereas before it would have been just a modular building.
Yeah. But just to conclude, I won't go on with it. It's something the industry itself needs to tackle and bring in the relevant investment to set up a factory or two and start producing what people want, or what the designers are asking them to produce.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else anything to jump in there?
I might just add a little bit, maybe, Colin, onto agreeing with both Eddie and Brian on a lot of things. Just going back to the question, and I'm glad we almost moved on from it, is why have we been so slow? I think up until recent times, it's still almost the case, is that traditional building has been the cheaper form of building. That's now starting to change. Our skills development over the last 20, 30 years has been very much towards traditional construction. So we have seen that there is a lot of move towards modern methods, but there's a lack of training, detail, skills that are there. But what we see, I think, and that's kind of leaving, that's my kind of, there's a long reason why we are where we are. But looking forward, I think the opportunities are immense, and the pace is going to pick up. We've seen even in recent times, government agencies have really put a focus on construction and modernizing construction with 3 different projects, like the Build Digital project. They're now looking at setting up a construction technology innovation center, and then following on with a modern methods of construction center as well, which will have demonstration parks and so on. So we may be behind, but the opportunities I think are immense. However, when we move into modern methods of construction, offsite manufacturing and so on, that's where we need to actually think differently. Is a challenge in terms of our skills. It's not construction, it's manufacturing. We need to think of in a manufacturing mindset. That means fix our design early, stick with that, which is a big challenge in our traditional construction at the moment. And then also, what we also need to do is make sure building control is there. Okay, sorry, I have to little bit of an interruption there. But one of the big things is knowledge around building control, making sure that what we design in a modern in offset is all compliant, and the quality is there as well. So the essence of it really is that we've an awful lot of learning to do, but the opportunities are really immense in the MMC space, and I think the government is really getting behind it now.
Yeah, okay. Marion, did you want to add in something there?
Yeah, a few things, I suppose. On the modern method of construction, I think one important thing to look at as well is that we really have a labor shortage in Ireland, but that labor shortage in construction exists in Europe, basically in all countries. So I think it's something important as well to take in mind, in terms of the speed of delivery, and also it might be a way to attract people that may not be naturally attracted to the construction industry. When Derek was mentioning it's more like kind of factory type of job, I'm thinking like, for instance, women. Just going back as well to what was discussed before in terms of embodied carbon, I think one thing to mention, it's not only, I suppose, a factor of the carbon intensity of material, it's also about the quantity of material we are using. And that's why we think the life cycle assessment is important. And I think one thing the industry needs is certainty there as well. It's something great that we had in the recent announcement about the new national retrofit scheme, that for the first time we have multi-annual budget. So that gives certainty to the industry to invest. I think we need certainty as well. We are moving in that direction in relation to wildlife carbon, with a clear timeline, like it has been done in other member states, saying from that date you need to measure, and then from that date is going to be, we are going to introduce limit and so on, just to provide that certainty so that industry can start investing. And I think it's particularly important in Ireland because if we look at our national development plan, like we need to build 300,000 homes by 2030. That's a lot of embodied carbon that will be associated with, these homes if we build in the way we are currently building. So that could totally blow our carbon budget. So that's a real concern, and that's why I think it's important, to move in that direction, to start addressing it.
Yeah. So basically, if we take a baseline now of 2022 and we looked at a traditional build, potentially what we could look at is an embodied carbon benchmark, and say, right, by 2025 you have to start with an embodied carbon of 80% below the 2022 level, or whatever the case may be, and just start working it that way.
Yeah, and start measuring as well to have a good benchmark. I think the first step is starting measuring on some buildings, and then being able to have a benchmark.
Okay. So then, in terms of how we drive change in the industry, us being heavily involved in this space, how do you feel that we can drive this change? Because obviously, I think we're all in fairly good agreement here that low carbon modular housing definitely is the way forward here. So I'm just really wondering as to how we can push change. Is it through education to consumers? Is it through developers, or what's the best way forward here?
I think you've summed it up in a lot of ways. It's a combination of everything, and it's as much as understanding the technology and understanding the effect of what we do. It's actually the communication piece to the wider, both technical community and right down to the customer or consumer, is really what's going to drive it. There's industry are trying to change. They're trying to develop as best they can. It's still a competitive market. Once we start to value low carbon and carbon as a whole, that's when the industry will also start to change. So it's an iterative process, but I think we often try to refine a process way too much before we really try and promote it. And it's through that learning is actually how it will really have a big effect. So really,
Derek, what you're saying there is that once we start, the industry will adopt and adapt and take it on board, but we have to make those initial early steps, which we're starting to do anyway with this H4.0 project, the one that we're working on. So we do have the local authorities interested in it, obviously, but ideally if we had developers interested in similar type project, they might adapt to that. But I suppose, like you said, it's slow steps, and then it should start to gather some pace by itself.
The value proposition to each stakeholder might be slightly different, and it's how you communicate one to understand what the client wants, and you can communicate in the right way. Now that might take some time as well, but if you go with the wrong message to a customer or developer that doesn't interest them, you're kind of going to lose the momentum of what you're trying to say. Whereas if you really refine that message, which can be different for everybody, I think that's really where you can have a big impact.
So just gone back to the Europeans and that have been doing this for a while, obviously they've come up against a lot of these challenges as well. Do you think that we need to basically look at their markets, see how they did it, what was a success for them, or should we just concentrate on our own Irish market, because we're a little bit different anyway in how we do things and our thinkings, etc., in terms of housing? Like, is there anything to be had from the way that they've done stuff in Europe?
I would say there's a lot to be learned from what they've done in Europe, because, you know, there's a lot of research going on in Europe and a lot of good practices being developed. I think, just going back to the original question about how can Ireland develop its modular construction, I think the whole thing with materials and embodied carbon, it's a push-pull. I think the products need to be developed, the systems and processes need to be in place, and the industry needs to see that there's a way forward in this, and that there's monetary value in it for them as both developers, investors, and people who want to make a living out of providing housing and buildings for people to utilize. And I think unless the products are there, they're not going to move. And that's where we need to bring in the investors. If there are new products there that people deem viable, investors need to be brought in and persuaded to manufacture them, set up the factories.
And in the context of that, Brian, then, do you think that there needs to be some kind of a subsidy scheme for these new materials and new construction methods just to get some traction in the game?
I think the carbon tax will act as a disincentive into the future as people start paying carbon taxes. If you're manufacturing a product that has a high carbon content, you're going to be penalized for it. So I think some of the disincentives are there. Incentives, I mean, the incentives, it'd be great to have, it's always great to have incentives, but they should be there or not. For this particular industry, I'm not in a position to say, you know, but it is always a good way to accelerate the production of something, is to provide incentives. Yeah, but I think it will come.
Yeah, so basically then as well, in terms of the Europeans and how they've been doing stuff and how we look to embed the 4.0 approach into Irish construction, we need to basically be looking more at their material element and the technology side of it, as opposed to the actual delivery on ground level. Would that be the way you'd see things? Get that piece right first?
I think these things evolve. There's no right way. I don't think there is a right way. They evolve, but they involve certain actors. You know, you do need the people with the money to invest. You need the entrepreneurs who have the ambition to develop the factory. You need an industry that's willing to accept the product, and all that is risk-based, and you need a market in which to be able to sell that product.
So then,
it's not. I don't think it'll be a one size fits all, but I think there is an approach there, a general approach that could be adapted to the needs.
So in terms then of the barriers, what would you see, and I'm putting this to everybody here, what would you see as being the biggest barriers to adopting this H4.0 type approach to construction? Is it consumer, or is it investor, or where is it? What's the biggest barriers? Marion, yeah?
I was more on the previous question. But I cannot. Sorry, that's fine. In terms of barriers, I think it's like there's so many things we need to address at the same time, as it was said by Derek. I'm not sure there's one single barriers, but I think is providing the certainty that we are moving in that direction, so that people really start seeing that's what is going to happen. And I think we can partly see that with change in legislation at European level, at other member state level. But I think it's also about the finance, as it was said, with the investors. And like, for instance, I know, like in Ireland, we have already Building Finance Ireland will give like an additional a discount loan for, you know, homes that are certified with the Home Performance Index, for instance, which do look at wildlife carbon. So I think there is the finance piece, but there is also the education piece. And by education, I mean to everyone, really, the construction industry, the finance industry, and why it's important. Public procurers, I think, because I think that's what I wanted to say. Green public procurement, I think, has a real role to play there. Like, I mean, we had a presentation recently from a region in northern France, where they have used public procurement to actually like develop biosource material industry in the region. So I think there is something there to look at as well, and education of homeowners as well. Yes, the BO, it's important, but there is more than the BO as well to agree on.
So really then, just in terms of a couple of organisations that could drive real change would be obviously the Department of Housing, and obviously the Construction Industry Federation would be two major players in this space who could have a real impact very quickly, I would have thought. So would you see anyone else apart from those two as having a major impact quickly?
It comes back as well to the design, really, and education around design and fixing design in terms of what we want to do. And
so do we pull in the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland?
I would suggest so as well, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that really those three players would have a major influence on this space in a very quick space of time, I would suggest. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else like to add anything else? David Walsh?
I think maybe David, yeah.
Hi. Thanks, Colin. It's Dominic Walsh here from the Southern Regional Assembly.
Yeah. Sorry.
And listen, the Regional Assembly, we're involved in two main areas. We're involved in the EU projects and programs, and I just put in the chat there information on a new call for funding in relation to the H40E project that you're currently engaged in. And I have given the details of my colleague there, Sarah Davoran, who you can contact on that, plus there's a webinar. But the other side of our work is in regional planning, and you may be aware that there's a regional spatial and economic strategy in place for the southern region. Now, that's very broad. It addresses spatial planning and economic development. It addresses housing policy, housing provision, and renewable energy, etc. But one particular area that I think may be of interest, and I think maybe something we need to focus on, is the area of skills and skills development in the transition to low carbon energy and low carbon construction. And there are a number of initiatives going on in the region, and one of our objectives in the region is to develop a learning region based on the UNESCO Learning Cities model. And so we've been talking to the ETBs, the regional skills managers. But so I suppose I'm not going, the time doesn't permit to go into detail here, but I just think that there's a lot of work that could be done in the area of skills and skills development with partners in the education section. And in particular, one of the things we found from talking to the ETBs and the higher education institutes in our work in this area is that there is sometimes a reluctance to get participation in the training project, the training courses in these areas. And there's also a reluctance by SMEs to engage sometimes and to release employees. So we're looking at, we hope to publish an action plan later this year that will focus on how we can address some of those areas to encourage greater participation in skills and skills development. But it's something that has to be, you know, all partners working together. So I just wanted to kind of just introduce that, one of the areas we need to focus on to assist us make this move in the medium to long term, you know. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good points there, Dominic. So just one thing there. I see that Simon has rightly said that initially, if we can just look at decarbonising the actual material supply chain would be very productive, because obviously if we're looking at doing a big sea change in the industry, it could take 10 to 20 years. You know, it's like turning a big ship. It's going to be slow, but obviously quick solutions are, you know, looking at decarbonising material supply chain. And I just see a note here from Mary Morrissey, and she asked the question, are the Department of Housing slow to embrace funding for what is seen as innovative construction methods? Eddie, would you have a view on that one? Is Eddie there? No. So I'm going to start wrapping up now. So really, is there anything else that anyone else feels they need to say?
No, I just regarding your last point, Colin, I don't think the Department of Housing are slow. You know, there's been a number of false dawns in relation to modular construction. Fast build, I don't know if anybody remember that, where we were told that houses could be built in a very fast period of time. So I think if you know, if people perceive a conservative approach, it's well justified. You know, it is up to the designers of products to ensure that they do what they do what they're supposed to do when they go forward. I think though the government and government agencies generally are always open to new ideas. Certainly here in Cork City Council, we've embraced a number of new ideas in relation to heating homes and how homes should be, how the operational carbon can be reduced. We have a number of ongoing projects in that area. So I don't think Department of Housing or any of its agencies and the local authorities are slow to embrace. I think what needs it is a question of the product meeting the requirement and stating what it does in the tin.
Yeah, okay.
It must do what it says in the tin. That's very important.
Okay, no, yeah, and a point well made there, Brian. You know, I'll open up the floor now.